Okay, so I think we're going to get started. It's about 12:30 here in the East. I'd like to welcome and thank you for participating in the Excel Life Sciences webinar, which is titled An Update on the Regulatory Environment for Clinical Research in India. My name is Dan McDonald, and I am the Senior Vice President of Business Strategy for Excel Life Sciences. And if you're not familiar with our company, Excel Life Sciences is a US-based clinical trial and site management organization. We have extensive operations in India and have been running clinical trials in India since 2010. We have a proven track record of supporting both North American and European biopharmaceutical companies with really all aspects of planning, placing, and executing their clinical trials in India. Let me start off by saying that we are honored to have all of you join us for the next 45 minutes as we try to bring you up to speed with the latest developments in India with regards to the regulations focused on the review and approval of new clinical trials. As you've undoubtedly heard or experienced, there have been several recent amendments to the legislation governing clinical trials in India. And these legislative changes were driven by the growing need to create a regulatory environment which is much more structured, transparent, and predictable really to all stakeholders. This comes on the tail of about an 8-year period which marked the emergence of India as a destination for global trials. In this time period, as many of us have read in industry trade journals and publications, has been marked by really, I guess, what could be classified as meteoric growth as the world's drug developers and their support providers expanded globally in search of ways to cut the time and costs associated with drug development and find new avenues for revenue growth. During that time period, India really did a remarkable job of creating and expanding and maintaining a framework for regulatory review and clinical trial management capable of supporting such a high demand. It's safe to say, though, I think at this point with time, some cracks have been revealed, and it's become clear that in order to support a healthy industry going forward, several changes are going to be needed. This conclusion resulted in a temporary halting of new INDs and NDAs in India in recent months. We're happy to say at the beginning of this presentation now that the restriction has been lifted and new trial applications are once again being reviewed and approved in India. In fact, our company just achieved an approval for a new trial application for a US-based sponsor company just recently. So today we're here to update you on the recent changes and provide you with our unique insights on what specifically changed and really what the changes mean and how to successfully navigate the trial application process going forward. The presenters today are two distinguished colleagues of mine, Dr. Vijay Kumar, who is the President and Chief Medical Officer of Excel Life Sciences, who's based here in the United States, and Mr. Aditya Vats, who's the Regulatory Manager for Excel Life Sciences, and he's based in New Delhi, India. While I won't spend time reading all of their entire bios, I will tell you that Dr. Kumar brings to this session over 40 years of pharmaceutical and drug development experience, including extensive regulatory management experience. He is responsible for starting the concept of site management organizations in India and has been personally involved in helping draft some of the important guidelines and legislation related to clinical research in India. Mr. Vats oversees all regulatory management activities at Excel Life Sciences. He is personally involved in the submission of all new clinical trial applications for Excel Life Sciences clients and really shepherding those applications successfully through the review process. In fact, Aditya is often seen walking the halls of the agency in India, meeting and working with members of the regulatory agency multiple times a week and bringing to the presentation unique insights which can only be gained through that type of exposure. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Kumar and to Mr. Vats, and we'll kick things off now. Vijay?
Thank you very much, Dan, and good morning and good afternoon and perhaps good evening also to some people in Europe. Thank you very much for making it convenient to attend this important webinar that we have launched, and to, as Dan said, to not only update you on what is happening and what does the future look like, and briefly let you also know that why we are where we are today, and we briefly, very briefly discuss the history of clinical trials in India, and then we'll go forward with the regulatory, the hierarchy or the organization of the regulatory agency in India, and various other aspects of clinical trial, like what we need to do to conduct a study in India, and how can it be successful, and Aditya will also highlight some of the recently amended guidelines. So, I'm on slide number 3, and this is, it is titled Chronology of Clinical Trials in India. It will be better if we understand a little bit of history to be better informed about the chronology. India has been a market of branded generics, and the patent law was amended in 1970 to allow only process patent and no product patent, and clinical trials are not mandatory for approval of drugs and devices in India. And the entire evolution started in 1995 when the government formed a committee to develop guidelines for clinical trials in India on the lines of US FDA regulations and ICH GCP guidelines. And it took a long time to formulate them and have many iterations. And the turn of the century has been very important for us, because there have been many milestones since the turn of the century. First and foremost, in 2001 and 2002, the Indian Council of Medical Research, it is equivalent to the NIH and the Central Drug Control Standard Organization, that is equivalent to the FDA and referred to in India as Drug Controller General of India, or DCGI. And these two bodies provided guidelines for ethical conduct of human research, and these formed the ethics guidelines for the first guidelines for ethics committee in India. And this was followed by abolishing the duty on importation of clinical trial material in 2003. Up until then, all the clinical trial material that was imported to India had a very hefty duty component, and this was a deterrent for carrying out clinical trials, apart from other deterrents. And in 2005, India was a signatory to World Trade Organization, and the patent law was amended to include product patent in addition to process patent. This really opened up the market for global pharmaceutical companies to consider India as a destination for clinical trials. However, there were some more impediments, and these impediments were in the nature of not permitting simultaneous phase global studies in India. And this was addressed in making sweeping changes, very major amendments to the Schedule Y, as it is called, of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. And this exercise was undertaken by the Drug Controller General of India, wherein the following were very important situations. That is, that they permitted the simultaneous phase global study in India. For example, if there was a phase 2 study in US or Europe, Indian sites could participate in such studies, and similarly in phase 3. And this was then the Schedule Y also contained guidelines of good clinical practice and guidances to sponsors, ethics committee, investigators, and the other stakeholders of drug development. And this also included information about export of biological samples and also that the importation license also was a part of the Drug Controller General's responsibility. And the next big step was in 2007 when the export license, mainly for export of biological samples of clinical trial subjects, was also placed under the control of the Drug Controller General of India. Earlier to that, we had to go to a separate ministry called the Ministry of Commerce, and we had to build in another 4 to 5 months of time to get that license for exporting. But in 2007, this was removed, and the Drug Controller General not only grants you the permission to conduct the study, issues a license to import the clinical trial material and the accessories, and also provides you with an export license to export biological samples to a central lab located outside India if that is necessary. And the next big change happened this year, that Dan was alluding to, that there were major changes in Schedule Y, like compensating the patients for trial-related injuries, and also it was all the ethics committees had to mandatorily register with the Drug Controller General. And for your information, more than 200 ethics committees have already been registered until now. I'm going to slide 4, where why do we consider that India already is and certainly will be an indispensable part of medicine's future, because the number of 1572s is growing, and there is a growing database, growing investigator base in not only in Tier 1 cities but also in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. You might also know, or you might be aware, that a number of physicians that are involved in clinical trials have been trained either in the US or in Europe. So, and there are other advantages of reducing the timeline for enrollment, getting more patients within the same time period, and also that the data that's accepted, the data that is generated from Indian sites is acceptable to the regulatory agency, that is the US FDA here and the EMEA in Europe. So all these are the factors that could really motivate and make it very attractive for global pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical and medical device companies to consider India for the next clinical trial. I will now go to slide number 5. That India was initially considered a rescue country, but now it's no longer a rescue country. You have many companies have India in their plan for conducting clinical trials. And why is it so? Because the confidence of the global biopharmaceutical and medical device companies is increased, because up until now, between 2005 and 2011, there have been 30 inspections by the US FDA, and you will see that there are 53 no action initiated and 47% voluntary action initiated, and there have been no official action, notices of official action. And also, the US FDA established an office in India in 2009, and the US FDA office in India has been actively involved in training the Drug Controller General of India staff in inspections. Additionally, there have also been at least 5 or 6 or more, 10 to 15 EMEA inspections, and these two are very compelling reasons for the data quality, data integrity, and data reliability of the clinical trial you conduct in India. Now, the next slide is that what is it that is already in place for to conduct a clinical trial in India, and what is it that would be desirable going forward? And there are The investigator understanding of clinical trials, the ethics committee's appreciation of maintaining and ensuring patient interest and subject safety, and also that there is a process of simultaneously applying to the Ministry of Health, which is the national regulatory agency, and also ethics committee for a clinical trial. And quite often you will not be surprised when you get an ethics committee conditional ethics committee approval earlier than the Ministry of Health approval. And so these are all in place, and there are the studies of complicated design going on now, and the PIs are understanding and are very capable in conducting your adaptive clinical trials for phase 2 and extended phase 2 studies. And what would we like to see? I personally would like to see that first-in-man approval is accorded, but until now, the first-in-man approval studies are not permitted for compounds discovered in India. However, you can certainly do extended phase 1 studies, and the other things that are awaited are investigator registration and site registration, and there's also a move to register the contract research organization or the CROs that are functioning in India. And we expect all these three to take place pretty soon. And who does not expect to have a better balanced media coverage? We know how the media behaves and their motivation for doing so. Then, as I said, that the DCGI, or the Central Drug Control Standard Organization, is a part of the Ministry of Health, and they are charged with certain very critical responsibilities to ensure public health and public safety. And these include laying down standards of drugs, cosmetics, diagnostics and devices, and also regulate clinical research in India, issue marketing approval and of new drugs and devices, and also monitor on an ongoing basis the safety and efficacy of a product in the Indian patient population. And there have been instances where the drug controller has insisted on a very vigorous post-approval mechanisms, like either a registry study or a post-marketing surveillance, and submitting the data to the DCGI on an ongoing basis. Also, there have been instances where there has been a conditional approval of drugs for a period of years. This could range from 1 to 2 years depending on the therapeutic group and the unmet medical need in the therapeutic group. For example, if it is a drug used for HIV infection, the drug controller, like the US FDA may give you an approval on the basis of a phase 2 study or an extended phase 2 study, but will insist on an equally rigorous post-approval study. And this has happened. This has happened in, and we have seen that the recent, my colleague Aditya will tell you about some of the recent changes in the approval process, and the team that are team of experts that is constituted, and they have provided their opinion in certain crucial therapeutic areas like cardiology and oncology by issuing provisional or conditional approval for 1 to 2 years. And then also they're charged with the function of regulating the standards of imported drugs. And recently, it might also interest you to know that there is a process of registration of site and the product for when the drugs or devices are imported. And the DCGI staff has also traveled overseas to inspect the manufacturing sites. That's the reason why they have a user fee for such cases, and this is a process that they have started very recently. Now, when you think of doing a clinical trial in India, as we started in slide 8. Slide 9 will tell you that what are the categories of clinical trials that are currently conducted in India. And as I said, phase 1 is permitted only for drugs or devices discovered in India, and the extended phase 1 studies like fed and fasting or special patient population are permitted, and there have been instances. Of course, simultaneous phase 1 studies for anti-cancer drugs can be done, because phase 1 studies for anti-cancer, as we all know, are not conducted in normal human beings, but in patient populations. And apart from that, all the other phase 3, phase 2, and proof of concept and proof of concept studies, not only global proof of concept studies, but India alone proof of concept studies also have been done for products discovered outside India. And BABE studies are mainly for generic drugs, but however, if you have a generic psychotropic or an anti-cancer drug, you know that B instead of B, there has to be it has to be combined with therapeutic equivalence. So such studies are also done. And medical devices is something that is new. As a matter of fact, the medical devices in India were not regulated up until 2005. It is only after 2005 that about 29 medical devices have been regulated, and these include mainly briefly I can tell you that these include cardiac devices used in cardiology, especially catheters and stents and other implantable devices, and also in orthopedics, bone cement, bone implants, and most other implants used in spinal surgery. And we can give you, we can certainly share with you the list of devices that are regulated in India, and device studies are slightly different, and probably that we could, if we get more requests, we can certainly have a webinar for only medical devices in the future. And there are also developing guidelines for evaluation of nutraceutical products, and there are also a separate unit in the Ministry of Health to help people develop and evaluate herbal medications. So there is the provision for botanicals or phytopharmaceuticals or herbals. I would now hand this over to my colleague Aditya Bhatt, who, as Dan said, really walks the halls every day in the DCGI's office and is very familiar with the goings on and the logistics and the whys and hows of getting a successful clinical trial for our clients. Over to you, Aditya.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for setting up the stage and taking up the webinar from here. And hello and thank you to all for joining today's webinar. I'll try to take you through the steps involved from dossier submission till we get the approval and NOC for conducting a clinical trial in India. Every sponsor, once they submit the dossier application, they have that kind of feeling that how application will move forward till final approval coming from the authority. So once the dossier is submitted at the DCGI's office, it is followed by a period of anticipation, anxiety, and hope from the applicant till we get the approval from the DCGI's office. And why I said anticipation, anxiety, and hope? Because we are anticipating and anxious to get the approval within a good time, and we are hoping that there are no queries in between. So it's actually a journey of anxiety to smile with all the pit stops in between till the application comes through to us. So between dossier submission and the NOC coming to us, there are two reviews which were done earlier from the year 2005 to 2010. There was a technical review and a critical review. The technical review was mostly done at the lower tier where the administrators will look into the technical information being provided by the sponsors in terms the application is complete or not. That came the critical review conducted by the senior level, the senior hierarchy in the DCGI's office to look into the critical review of the application. And as Dan and Dr. Kumar said that, with the coming year 2013 and even before that, there would many reforms get in just to make the process more transparent and accountable to the sponsors. And that's where, if you see the two highlighted things which came in, was pre-screening. Now, when the dossier submission was done further in 2011 until now, a pre-screening, a face-to-face meeting was done with the drug inspectors, where you can actually ask your questions to the drug inspectors and complete your application. And then again you move to the technical review tier and the critical review tier from assistant drug controller and deputy drug controller, and then came a new segment in between which constituted of 12 key opinion leaders from different therapeutic areas. So every therapeutic area NDAC or MDAC was made. If suppose an application was filed for cardiology, there was a cardiology new drugs advisory committee which would look into the NDAC review from the safety and efficacy and designing of the protocol and would ask the sponsor to answer key opinions coming from the medical background. This was done only to safeguard the patient in terms and see that the design was good enough and the feasibility of the protocol to be run or the clinical trial to be run in India is good enough or not. Now we would see, coming on to slide number 12, the type of regulated documents which would be submitted or are essentially to be submitted to the DCGI for the review. They're basically divided into three segments: the administrative, study documents, and additional documents which are required. So in administrative, what we see is a cover letter which describes the common things like who is the sponsor, why do they want to do this clinical study in India, and then a transfer of responsibility is basically a letter of authorization saying that the part of responsibilities for doing this research clinical trial study in India would be given to a local applicant who will file in place of a global sponsor to the Indian regulatory authorities. And an application would go under Rule 122DA to conduct clinical trials for new drugs in the form of Form 44, along with a challan receipt, which is actually a fee for evaluating the whole document, the dossier, to see whether the clinical trial can be conducted in India or not. Apart from that, there is an application in Form 12 which goes for license to import drugs for the purpose of examination, test and analysis. This basically gives you an import license to import your drugs or ancillary supplies which will be needed to conduct and carry out your clinical study in India. And of course, there would be affidavits coming from the sponsors which would range from the authenticity of data being captured in the IB and whether the trial has been discontinued anywhere or not. All those would come in affidavits on the letterhead of the sponsors and notarized as well. Going forward to slide number 13, we would see the study documents which would be required, the essential documents. In this, the essential documents which we require are the protocol, of course, the case report forms, which could be a draft case report form, may not be a final case report form, but the investigative brochure depicting the preclinical studies which have been carried out and the phase 1 or phase 2 data. If you're doing a phase 3, what was the results, and preclinical studies as well. Then the informed consent document will be needed for the DCGI's review, and it has to be an English version only. So despite coming to India, the global sponsors, when the application goes to the DCGI's office, the only language for the informed consent which is reviewed by the DCGI's office is only English. We might see going further when we go into the IRB sections, Institutional Review Board, where they demand not only the English version of the informed consent, but other languages also, where the volunteer or the study participant can actually understand that version of informed consent. And as I said, that previous clinical trial data, apart from that, there are some other important documents like undertaking letters by the investigators with their credentials in the form of CV and medical registration certificate. This is similar to what US has in terms of 1572. So in India, they require undertaking, which is exactly, if not exactly, it's a replica of 1572, where bulleted points are written down that investigators have gone through the protocol, they know what they're doing, they will abide by the laws, they will abide by GCP. So the clauses are there and given undertaking which the investigator signs, and the original documents get submitted to the DCGI's office. Apart from that, DCGI would also require the ethics committee approval from global sites if any one has given the approval to the study, and if the regulatory status of the drug, that is if it is marketed anywhere or not, and other status of the study, that is whether it has been approved or not. Now going to slide number 14, some additional documents to complement our dossier or to strengthen our application are a clear-cut document to rationalize the purpose for the dose and indication, and why do you want to do this trial in India, the purpose of doing the trial in India. Apart from that, some other points to consider for them is what is the number of patients you're going to enroll from India as compared to the global population, because as of now the DCGI gives you permission to conduct a 20% of share from the global population. The number of investigative sites to be included in India and other participating countries and their sites. Now coming to slide number 15, there are basically some new mandates which came in as a reform, and to lay down some of the lacunas found in the system and to mitigate them. These were basically launched by the end of 2012 and beginning of 2013, and some even before the registration of clinical trial was done to ICMA was done in 2008, where similar to CTG, clinicaltrial.gov, where any trial which is going on in US has to be registered in clinicaltrials.gov. Similarly, in India, before you do a trial and apply to the DCGI, parallelly you have to register your trial onto a clinical trial registry. Another important thing, a new mandate which came in, was the verbatim language to be used in the informed consent form as per the checklist issued by the DCGI's office, which says that the medical care would be given to the patient if there is any clinical trial related injury which happens to the subject. And come 2013, they have added, considering the safety and efficacy of the patients, they have added that the trial has to be done where the infrastructure is complete and good, and where the ethics committee has already been registered. We will see going forward that what all new guidelines came in which now require the ethics committees to get registered under the umbrella of DCGI. Coming to slide number 16, this is the basic question which everyone would like to hear an answer to. The timeline for an application to be filed at the DCGI's office, the time till we get the NOC from the DCGI's office, and how it has fared. We have already seen that earlier from 2005 to 2010 the process was different, and come 2011 there was new drug advisory committee, or in cases of medical devices, medical device advisory committees were launched where they would review the files. So the basic time our company Excel Life Sciences takes from start to finish is 4 to 5 months, where we actually go and defend the application in front of the advisory committee and follow up with the DCGIS till the approval. So once the NDSC approves it, within 14 days we get the approval, which means that the timeline to get the approval is 4 to 5 months. Pertaining to the ethics committee structure in India, the typical meeting frequency which is there in most of the ethics committees in India is one per month. So basically they're meeting every month to discuss about 7 to 8 applications. So once we do an application to the DCGI's office, we can actually do a parallel application to ethics committees also to save time, because DCGI doesn't want specifically an ethics committee approval from Indian side. We can parallelly work towards getting an approval from the ethics committee, and the quorum which is required in the ethics committee is basically of which has to be met to give us the authenticated status of an approval from ethics committee has to comprise of at least a medical scientist in the ethics committee, a clinician, a legal expert, a social scientist, an ethicist, a theologian, and a layperson. The quorum of 5 has to be met if an approval has to be granted from the ethics committee, and it has to be valid. And the basic requirements for the IRB approval are protocol investigator brochures. I will not go through each one of them because these are the essential documents which basically goes all around the world in all the ethics committees. But in case of India, the difference is the informed consent, where the ethics committee would want the informed consent in all the languages to be used at the site. Especially if a site is using 10, then you have to actually go back to the site with 10 informed forms with one master English informed consent, and to authenticate whether the translation of an English master informed consent form has been done correctly into different languages. They have to be provided with the back translations of the informed consent, the translations of the informed consent, as well as the certificates and the CVs of the translators to authenticate that the informed consent has been translated correctly. And the second important thing which is required by the ethics committee, which is specific to India, is the trial registration number. The clinical trial registry of India, where any clinical trial you do in India has to get registered on CTRI, Clinical Trial Registry of India. And this number has to be referred to the ethics committee so they can also check online whether this has been registered. If not, you can provide them the temporary trial registration number, and following your DCGI approval letter, it becomes a permanent trial registration number which can be submitted to the ethics committee further. Now we would see in slide number 19 the recent amended guidelines which just recently came in, because the DCGI's office is actually striving and attempting to bring more transparency and make the clinical trials more regulated in India by releasing various guidelines and various notifications. So there was here is one which was released on 30th of June 2013, which was to do with compensation in case of injury or death related to clinical trial related injury or death, where we need to provide the subject the free medical treatment, and if found related, the financial compensation also. And there were some changes done on 30th of Jan 2013 to the Drug and Cosmetics Act, under which the Schedule Y and Appendix 5, where a statement on financial compensation and free medical management to be provided to the subject was laid down. Going forward, they were still not finished, and they came up with still further guidelines to make the clinical trial scenario, the regulations, much more perfect. And on 1st of February 2013, the notification came out for non-compliance of approval condition. So similar to like FDA auditing the sites, the DCGI team will also be auditing the site and issuing warning letters, and if the sites being found non-compliant to the protocol, they could even be handed out a study rejection or a discontinuation notice. 1 week down the line, again a major thing came up as a notification where mandatory registration of ethics committee was made compulsory. And as of now, if I want to tell you, there are already 250 plus ethics committee which have been registered with the DCGI's office. And there has been a notification that no ethics committee will review or accord any approval before they get registered with the CDSU, the DCGI's office. And the ethics committees were given the empowerment to analyze and forward their opinion of serious adverse event review and compensation. And they were also made aware that the ethics committee, even though registered under the DCGI's office, they are still open to audit and inspection by the DCGI's office. And their registration will be valid only for 3 years until unless during the audit and inspection found non-compliant, they will be suspended or cancelled. So these were some of the recent amended guidelines which recently came into force. And with this, I would hand it over to Dan to take you forward with the presentation.
Thank you, Aditya, for bringing us up to speed with some of the recent amended guidelines. This has been very helpful, I'm sure, for a lot of our attendees. So the next few slides are going to close out the presentation, and then we can open it up for questions. As you've heard reiterated time and again throughout the presentation given today, the steps and the processes involved in the submission and the review of a new clinical trial application have improved in India. Yet we would say that it still remains very important to get your application right the first time. And I'd argue that that's important no matter where in the world you are submitting an application. The same very much holds true for India. Planning is critical. We would recommend that you chart your estimated timelines well in advance with regards to the steps and the time involved for regulatory approval. While our company achieves approval sometimes in as little as 3 months, we definitely would always err on the side of being cautious and adding some buffer to your timelines. Better to be conservative and set the right expectations internally. Use of a truly local entity can pay big dividends. A company like Excel Life Sciences can certainly help you facilitate a pre-application advance meeting with the agency, similar to what you would do in the United States. This will allow you to discuss your study with the agency, identify any potential challenges or concerns in advance, and make sure that those are addressed in the application, or if there are protocol changes required, to make sure that those are all done in advance of your application. We'll provide you with a checklist for exactly what documentation is required and what steps are required for a correct and accurate submission, and Aditya went through a lot of those documents and requirements during the presentation. And then I think we found that certainly using somebody who walks the halls frequently of the agency and has submitted successful applications previously. The agency should know the organization that's submitting your application, know that there's a history of submissions from that group that are credible and valid studies for their consideration, and that entity is a familiar entity to the DCGI. This is very helpful and very important. It's also important to be fairly confident that the protocol that you are submitting, barring any small administrative type changes, will be the one that you follow throughout the study, or at least for a while. You should know that major changes to your study post-submission will most likely result and the need for new applications and additional steps, which essentially would drop your application to the bottom of the pile. So you want to try to reduce the amount of queries that come as a result of an application that is missing information, or in the event that you have a protocol change and you've got to submit a new application or an amendment to the DCGI, and that can result in delays. And we've seen this as a company where we've been at investigator meetings and have already submitted applications, and then you see investigators start to pull apart a protocol and ask a lot of questions, and the sponsor wanting to go back and make revisions. It's important that as a sponsor you try to get those things fleshed out in advance as much as possible, so that the application that you submit, the protocol that you submit, is as close to final as possible. So in summary, just to highlight some of the things that Dr. Kumar and Aditya mentioned, there have been significant changes in the regulatory environment that really have put India in line with most of the mature markets in terms of consistency, predictability, review, and approval timelines. But complexities still exist, and it requires a strong understanding of regulations and DCGI expectations to avoid hurdles, pushback, and delays. So early planning and preparation is key, and I think you heard that time and again. Choosing a strong partner with local knowledge, true local knowledge, not not just a small office someplace, but actually a company that is actively managing trials in India, can be the difference between success and failure. Certainly a partner with contacts at a regulatory agency and who the DCGI is familiar with can help. You want to know site IRB meeting schedules in advance, as some can take as much as 12 weeks between meetings, so getting the timing right is critical. Our organization can certainly help you with that. And when in doubt, always assume the most thorough route and be prepared to address IRB and DCGI queries quickly. So we hope you heard during the course of this presentation that things are very much back on track in India with regards to the review and approval of new clinical trial applications, that your expectations for timelines around the review and approval of trial applications should be reasonable. If companies are telling you that it's going to take 6 to 7 months, or if you're experiencing that, there's certainly something amiss. As you saw from the presentation, our company is used to getting 4 and 5 month approvals, and sometimes faster than that. It's really important to get the steps right, to have experience doing it, and to be a familiar entity with the DCGI. And those are all things that our organization certainly brings to the table. I know that we're running against the deadline for this session, but we certainly want to give you a chance to ask any questions. There's a chat box that is located on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, where you can actually send a question directly to the presenters. So anybody interested in asking a question can do so now, and I can read those questions out loud, and we'll do our best to go through and answer them. If you don't have any questions, then certainly feel free to exit the call. And we would like to know that if there are any follow-up questions you don't feel like sharing publicly, you can send those directly to us. The email address to send those to is solutions@excellifesciences.com. And we'll send you a follow-up email following this webinar to make sure you have our contact information for any follow-up discussions you'd like to have. So there's one question that's come through, and I'll ask this to Aditya and to Vijay. Are there any therapeutic areas that take longer than others for approval? What has been our experience?
Yes. Dan, this is Vijay. I think the placebo-controlled trials in psychiatry are the ones that are likely to take long, because by and large, even the investigators, let alone the ethics committees, are not very keen on undertaking placebo-controlled studies. So this is something that probably you may like to, the attendees may like to consider when determining if India is the right place for a clinical trial. As we all know, it's not only in India, there are other regulatory agencies in other parts of the world that also are quite, if not critical, they examine the need and the validity of a placebo-controlled trial in a situation such as a psychosis or a bipolar disorder or schizophrenia.
Terrific.
And these are likely to take longer time.
Okay. And if I could just ask you and Aditya to speak as close to the microphone as possible, so it's some folks have had a little trouble hearing.
Okay.
Another question has come in. Can you please speak to the standard of medical care in India relative to the U.S. or other Western countries? This is very important in oncology trials, for example.
Oh yes, certainly all the oncology trials that we conducted until now, we have been very careful that the standard of care matches the standard of care in the U.S. Otherwise, there would be a separate patient population group that would be involved in a country like India. So now, even though we might say that India is a vast country and the number of undiagnosed malignancy cases of different malignancy are very, very large, one has to apply a very careful and a very fine filter to filter out the patients and do the feasibility, because not everybody can afford the standard of care. So, for example, if there are 20 cases of, let's say, carcinoma breast in a particular stage 2, out of 20, we might recommend that that only 4 or 5 patients are likely to receive the standard of care. Therefore, we will protect the patient enrollment depending on the number of patients who are likely to get the standard of care. So this is the standard of care is there, and it is undertaken. And another thing that we'll also have to consider while in the standard of care issue is that quite a number of generic preparations of drugs that are available in the US are used in standard of care. So any organization with whom you want to partner will have to let you know that whether it is a branded drug or a generic drug. And this is also important because quite often in oncology the sponsor is expected to pay for the comparator or for the standard of care. If your drug is an add-on to the standard of care, please be prepared to pay the cost of standard of care treatment for the patients. And this standard of care you could choose, and you can choose one out of the several brands available in India for uniformity and consistency and quality.
Thank you, Vijay. There was another question with regards to translations. Apart from the informed consent document, what other documents do the regulatory bodies require translations for into local languages?
Yeah, good question there. I think quality of life questions are also need to be translated. For example, there, as many of you in the audience may know, that India has only 23 or 25 languages. So quality of life questionnaires are not validated in all languages. So you have to choose areas where the quality of life questions are validated in the local language so that the patients can be administered this quality of life questionnaire. So quality of life questionnaire also needs to be translated. And sometimes I'm not very sure, I defer to Aditya about electronic diaries. Aditya, can you comment on the electronic diary?
Yes, Dr. Kumar. Yes, of course, a very good question about what all documents other than informed consent needs to be translated. Now, the base of this is whatever documents are actually going to the patient, the subject, has to be translated. Because if the subject doesn't understand an informed consent for an example, because he's the one who is actually going to administer it and sign it. He needs to understand it in his native language. And similarly, a study diary in case of diabetic trial where the patient has to actually record his postprandials and other glucometer testings, if he's the one who is capturing it, we need to get the study diaries also translated so that he is familiar with the language in which he is writing and understanding, and coming across with the and not coming across with something which is a barrier to him and not filling up the things correctly. So of course, apart from informed consent forms, the study diaries and the questionnaires will have to get translated.
All patient-facing material, by and large, has to be translated. However, I would also like to inform the group that there are many software is available to translate into many languages, and so that.
Okay, thank you for answering the question with regards to translations. There's another question regarding the DCGI and inspection of sites. That there's now a requirement to have inspection of sites by the DCGI, or there's a chance for inspection of sites in India. How do you ensure that the site quality is good and that the sponsor's trial is not negatively impacted?
Yeah. I can, from experience, I can say that it starts with the selection of the site and the feasibility that somebody does for your protocol. And this is where the presence of a site coordinator is crucial to data quality, data reliability, and data integrity. Because it is unlike in the US, where the site coordinator manages multiple trials or even multiple locations. Quite often, the study coordinator for a company like Excel Life Sciences is dedicated to one single investigator to ensure patient protocol compliance, total conformity with the US FDA CFR guidelines and ICH GCP guidelines. And I would also like to share with you and that from the month of January until date, there have been over 300 site inspections performed by the Drug Controller General of India, and there are some new guidelines being developed for this. So our company only last week had a couple of surprise inspections, and I think that as Aditya has mentioned that that every site, clinical site, has to be inspected annually by the staff of DCGI. Am I right, Aditya?
Yes, as per the recent, again, new guideline and a notification coming from the DCGI's office, the sites are open to inspection by the DCGI's office annually, and that could be an intimated annual inspection, or that could be impromptu without letting know the site that the inspectors would be coming. They can be audited. That is unscheduled audit inspections.
You make a good point, Dr. Kumar, about the presence of clinical research coordinators. I know that our surveys have shown that only about 15% or less of sites in India actually have a coordinator on staff. And if they do have a coordinator, those coordinators are often sort of responsible for managing a number of studies. Whereas the model I know that we employ involves us deploying our own full-time clinical research coordinator to each study site to work with the investigator on a one-to-one basis to support a single sponsor's study, which can make a big difference from a quality standpoint and make sure that a good site is selected, and that site performs well, and that patients are consented and taken care of during the study. There's another question that's come in here. This is with regards to CNS studies. Are there any particular hurdles for CNS therapeutic clinical trials?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, Dan, there is a concern about placebo-controlled trials in neuropsychiatry. So one has to be careful about the study design. So there is neuropsychiatry. It certainly invites a very close scrutiny and attention and review.
Okay, we'll keep the call open just for another few minutes and see if there's any last questions that come through. As I mentioned, you can also feel free to email us at solutions@excellifesciences.com. We'll make sure that we get back to you right away with an answer to your questions, at least probably within 2 business days. And certainly would encourage you to follow up with us regarding any other questions or comments you have with regards to the presentation. I believe when you log off, you will receive an email survey, and we would like to hear your feedback on the presentation, what you liked, and if there are anything that you think that we could improve upon in the future, or questions that were unanswered. We'll certainly address those with you. It looks like that's all the questions, so I'd like to thank Dr. Kumar and Aditya for doing a terrific job presenting the information today. We certainly thank all of you for attending this webinar. We look forward to scheduling future webinars on topics related to clinical trials in India, and look forward to any feedback, questions, and suggestions you have via email in the days ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.